Good morning, Dan and Amy. We're coming to you live this morning from Lakeshore Recycling Systems in Morton Grove, part of our AM 560 Signature Bank Business Tour. And we've had some news that Mike Scott's been reporting on all morning. A fifth bomb, this Austin serial bomber that exploded at a FedEx facility late last night, early this morning. This following on reports yesterday of a fourth bombing where two individuals are either riding or pushing their bikes in a subdivision in southwest Austin when a bomb exploded, potentially tripwire.
Yeah, they tripwired it, and it went off. And then that prompted the Austin police chief to tell everyone in that neighborhood, stay inside, do not leave your homes.
Right.
And then that was, then earlier there's two people were killed by a bomb that was delivered to their homes. It was in a package that was not from the post office or from UPS or from FedEx. And then a Hispanic woman was injured as well. Yeah,
and the hate crime theory is running up against the fact that yesterday the two individuals who were injured, significantly injured, the two young men were white. So it seems like Austin police have been smart to show restraint in terms of making any pronouncements about motive until they get a better handle on an actual motive that can be substantiated. I can't think of anybody better to address what's happening in Austin than James Fitzgerald, his retired FBI special agent and criminal profiler who cracked the Unabomber case. He's immortalized in this series on Netflix called Manhunt, which I highly recommend. It's really good. Paul Bettany plays the Unabomber, and Sam Worthington plays James Fitzgerald. It's a really well done series, very interesting, and I've forgotten a lot of the details about what was. How the whole Unabomber case proceeded and how it was ultimately solved. So it's just an interesting series, and of course want to get his perspective. So we're pleased to be joined now by aforesaid FBI criminal profiler James Fitzgerald. Thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey Dan, good to be with you and Amy and your listeners in the Chicago area. Real quick here, the Unabomber case was solved as a team. It wasn't me alone. I always have to get that out there to make sure everybody understands that. And this case in Austin is being worked as a team, maybe upwards of 500 investigators right now, and they're trying to do the same thing, get a resolution to it.
No, that's a fair point. And by the way, the series that I recommended that I mentioned makes that point too. And frankly, even I don't know if this was sensationalized or not, but the interesting thing in the Unabomber case, one of the things I really didn't remember was that his brother, the Unabomber's brother, ultimately was helpful to the FBI in locating him, right?
Yeah, and quite frankly, you may not be surprised to hear this. You're not the first interview I've done on this, TV and print as well as other radio. And basically, every time I'm talking, and I'll repeat it today, there is somebody out there that recognizes this guy and that he's doing something different. He's off his sort of normal charted course for the day, and he's hung up, if not obsessed, with putting together these devices or packaging them the right way. He may have some already lined up. There may be some he's modifying at the last minute. And what I've also said, March 2nd is the first fatality, the first recorded bombing. But I assure you, having studied serial bombers a good part of my career, there have been earlier practice runs in fields, in valleys, in plots of woods, whatever, because these guys don't want to take a chance their very first device is a dud and nothing happens and all the evidence is left there intact. So there's no doubt that people somewhere in the outskirts of Austin, 5 miles outside or 55 miles outside, I don't know, but there's been some guy over the last month or two or three that's been out there with these little, explosions just to make sure his devices work. That's what police have to look for, too. And maybe that, if it's not a brother like David Kaczynski, it'll be somebody who happened to be camping out there, hunting, or somebody in a neighborhood who saw someone carrying around stuff like this and said, you know what, maybe he's the guy and I should call the police and see where that goes.
All right, so the first 3 attacks involved suspicious packages that were left on doorsteps. The one that injured the 2 people that were either pushing their bikes or on their bikes, how was that one different?
Yeah, clearly a modification there. It definitely shows this bomber he was already showing his levels of sophistication. The tripwire aspect showed even more sophistication. You need to spend a little more time at the crime scene, not a whole lot necessarily, but you really need 2 points of anchor. you need the device firmly secured to one side of the sidewalk, we'll say. I think that's what we had here. Either, sort of nailed into the side of a tree, and it wouldn't actually be nailed, but facing to the side of some kind of solid device, or even on the ground, but perhaps pointing up a bit. And then the other side, I believe, was hooked to a for sale sign from a real estate office. So the point is, the offender had to make sure that both sides of this device were taut. So because if the wire was just pushed and nothing happened, it would be a failure. This guy hasn't had a failure yet, certainly not since March 2nd, and he knows what he's doing. And now it got even to a higher level of sophistication in that he put a device somewhere in a FedEx box. It sounds like, I'm sure he didn't walk into one of the stores somewhere and do this, and he put it in there, and it had to be able to survive the drop from the, opening the lid and putting it down, and it had to then survive a truck ride into this distribution center. So it's not just a motion detector waiting for the first person to pick it up, or a tripwire, which effectively just, puts 2 points of metal into contact. Now there may, and I'm not sure 100% about this, there may have been a timer in there for, who knows, 10 hours, 12 hours, and once it hit that clock, it just happened to be on the assembly line in the FedEx facility. That's when it went off. So this guy is definitely showing his levels of sophistication. He's done this before, or he's practiced a whole lot in the past before he finally went public.
How does the FBI process trying to kind of zero in on the profile of a bomber like this, where it could be somebody that's military, it could be somebody that's got a background in explosive in the construction industry, it could be somebody who was radicalized online potentially, it could be somebody who's an academic like Kaczynski was. I mean, so it's such a broad range of people that could potentially have this sophistication. How do you narrow the search?
Well, you're right, and Dan, you pointed out, almost the professional background of this person, or at least potential background of this person. But we'll have profilers on board. I know they're there for a fact, and they're looking at some behavioral indicators in terms of what this person's all about. So, unfortunately, going back even 30, 40 years, there was this thing called the Anarchist Cookbook that you could actually learn how to make a device with this, old school, bound volume of how to do bad things to kill people. Now, of course, going online, you can learn a lot of this stuff on your own. It probably shouldn't be there, but none of us can really control that. And so there may be some combination of that. Does this person have extensive background in some kind of construction, demolition, in terms of using explosives, perhaps military, perhaps law enforcement? They tend to be the rare types who actually get involved in these types of crimes. It's somebody who picked it up along the way on his own, trial and error. They may or may not have all their fingers. There's many a serial bomber that starts but blows himself up the first time and never has the word serial added to his title. So this guy has obviously made it through 5 known devices so far. But like I said, in February and January, somewhere in the Austin area, there are probably a number of trial runs that this guy's doing. And they may still be going on as he's upping the ante here with different kinds of devices, making them detonate in different ways, and no doubt add to the lethality of each one by inserting tacks and nails and glass and you name it, just to for the sole purpose of ripping flesh. That's what this guy wants to do.
He watches the television and in cable stations to see, the destruction that he did?
You can definitely bet. Serial bank robbers, serial rapists, once they sort of realize they can't control themselves, they absolutely follow the media. And nowadays it's instantaneous, with various media websites, not to mention 24-hour, news coverage and old school newspapers. So this guy is definitely following what's happening. He wants to know what the police are doing. I wouldn't even be surprised if he calls a police hotline and says, he has some information about something. And we've had guys clever enough over the years that they'll get a dispatcher on the line and the caller will actually start asking questions of them. Oh, I saw some police over in this neighborhood. Were they checking that out? And they may catch the dispatcher or the phone answer off guard and actually give some information away about what the investigators are actually doing. So I don't know if we have that here yet, but I'm hoping the investigators are on guard and expecting that anybody who calls in possibly could be attempting to insert himself into the investigation and try to get information that way.
How do you try to zero in on motive, particularly in the 21st century where you've got all this information online and metadata? Is that part of the profiling in the 21st century, too, is poring over all the content that is available online to try and zero in on somebody that has a manifesto or the makings of it like Kaczynski did, or has some other motivation that might present itself the way the D.C. sniper did, for example?
Well, yes, and the investigators are looking at all of this right now. They're certainly studying victimology. I know it seems perfectly random now with, a FedEx box. I'd be curious to see who it's addressed to and what the return address is on it. Of course, it's going to be bogus, at least the return address, but that could tell us a little something about motivation. Even, the neighborhoods from where these things are placed are now being deposited in boxes. There's a case I remember from September of 2006. I worked on it, and there was a bombing in Hinsdale, Illinois. I don't think it's too far from Chicago. Am I correct?
No. Yeah, right. 30 minutes. Yeah.
And a couple of weeks later, there was one in Salt Lake City, and the devices were very much the same. And here it turns out it was undertaken by a guy named Thomas Zajac, who was upset that in both of those, the Hinsdale police and later the Salt Lake City police arrested one or two of his children, and supposedly the kids had been, roughed up a little bit. Mr. Zajac didn't like this, and he decided to put a couple pipe bombs in each neighborhood and write some letters to the chiefs of police. So there's a guy, and then he stopped after two because there was only two sons that had a problem, and that's all he did. He's eventually been arrested. He's awaiting trial out in Utah. So there's just one case of somebody, for very odd means, personal to him, decided to, take on the government, take on two different cities. And luckily, these bombs did go off, but nobody was nearby at the time, and no one was hurt. So it could be very, very personal to someone. Of course, not everyone is like a Kaczynski or an Eric Rudolph, where it's these grand ideologies and philosophies, even though those folks also had their own personal demons and psychological issues they were working through in terms of what was compelling them to do some of what they did. But usually when these guys start, they don't stop unless they think they were almost caught, or in fact, if they are caught, or lastly, of course, if they blow off hands and arms, that usually stops their bomb-making abilities. But this guy shows no sign of stopping in Austin, Texas, and I have a feeling we're going to hear from him again before long.
He is James Fitzgerald. He is retired FBI special agent, criminal profiler, gained fame from the Unabomber case, being part of the team that solved the Unabomber case. He's also author of the book, A Journey to the Center of the Mind. James Fitzgerald, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate your insights.
You're welcome, Dan. You're welcome, Amy.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like